He just wanted to go up to a meeting, but he got stuck with a woman who changed his life. You won't believe what happened between the 14th and 15th floors. Hey my friends, before we begin this amazing story, leave your comment where you're watching from, okay? And remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Andrew Miller woke up every day at 6 in the morning, without needing an alarm clock. The habit had been ingrained over years, as if the body had learned that sleeping too much was a dangerous luxury. The apartment he lived in was spacious, quiet, and cold, not because of the temperature, but because of the absence of life. Since the divorce, he had avoided calling it home. It was functional, modern, perfectly decorated by a hired professional but impersonal. He got out of bed, put on his slippers, went to the kitchen and made his own coffee, more out of habit than pleasure. He always ate the same thing, a slice of whole wheat bread with cottage cheese and a glass of green juice. He turned on the TV without paying attention and let the news scroll while checking my emails on my tablet. He no longer read attentively. Everything was automated. In the building's gym, he worked out with headphones and avoided speaking to the few neighbors who recognized him. He had no time or inclination to feel compassion. He was a man who had gotten where he wanted, but he no longer knew exactly why he had wanted it so much. That Monday, Andrew dressed more carefully than usual. He had a crucial meeting with foreign investors, and he knew that every gesture, every word, every second of delay could be interpreted as a sign of weakness. He chose a tailored dark suit, a starched white shirt, and perfectly polished Italian shoes. He checked his leather folder with his documents and took the exclusive elevator down to the garage, where his chauffeur was waiting with the car already running. On the way to the office, he looked out the window as if seeing everything for the first time. The hurried pedestrians, the street vendors on the corners, the crowded buses. Sometimes he wondered if he still remembered what it was like to walk unnoticed along a sidewalk. I had already been that guy with a backpack and a worried look about the end of the month. But today was different, at least on the surface. Inside, I sometimes felt a tiredness I couldn't name. Upon arriving at the Hudson Center, he automatically greeted the receptionist and headed for the elevator. Lobby. Everything under control. Everything in just the right time. At least that's what he believed. Across town, Lauren Brooks lived a very different pace. I woke up at 4:50 a.m., as usual. It was the only time I could safely use the bathroom before the rest of the rooming house woke up. She shared the space with 4 other women, all from different Midwestern cities, all struggling to survive in New York City. Hot water was rationed, so she learned to be quick. She dressed in a light-colored blouse and dark jeans and pulled her still damp hair into a messy bun. She made strong coffee using a makeshift filter and ate a piece of stale buttered bread. At the small table in her room, she opened the project tube and reviewed each page. She was going to present the development concept for a public housing complex in the South Bronx to a group of engineers, and she couldn't look like an amateur. When she stepped outside, the sky was still dark, and she already knew the day was going to be hectic. She walked to the station, hugging the subway to her chest and dodging puddles and potholes. On the subway, she stood up and squeezed in, as usual. But that day, halfway through the journey, the train stopped in the middle of the tunnel and swerved. Today of all days, she thought. She took a deep breath, stayed calm, and got off at the next station. There was still time. She needed to run. Lauren got off the subway and hurried through the streets of Madison Avenue, dodging elegant people with coffee in hand and hurried steps. She was breathless but determined. She knew she didn't have the same important last name as the other architects, nor the same connections, but she had the project in her hands, and that was okay. As she entered the lobby of the building that housed the office that had invited her, her eyes scanned the details of the place. Everything was very white, very clean, very expensive. She took a deep breath, clutched the tube of plans to her chest and headed for the elevators. When she saw that the private elevator doors were about to close, she stepped forward and shouted, "Please wait." The voice came out louder than I expected. Someone pressed the button and the door stopped. He stepped in with a smile and murmured, still holding his breath, "Thanks, and the subway broke down today." It was then that, for the first time, she looked at the man next to her, and only then did she realize she'd gotten on the elevator with Andrew Miller, the CEO of the company that dominated half the market's conversations. But for some reason, he didn't change his posture. He didn't even try to look different. He just took a deep breath and stood there, trying to contain the sweat from running and the butterflies in his stomach. The elevator began to rise silently. Lauren adjusted the project tube in her arms, still panting, and discreetly glanced at the digital panel that marked the floors. Andrew kept his gaze fixed straight ahead, but he had already carefully noted her presence. It wasn't common for someone to invade his bubble like that, much less so without ceremony. He was used to a different kind of treatment, people who flattered him, who measured their words, who always seemed interested in pleasing him. But this woman there, she seemed to be simply living her own morning chaos and trying not to miss an important appointment. Even without saying much, she had already broken his morning pattern, and perhaps that was why he didn't react impatiently when the elevator suddenly jerked and stopped. A sharp jolt, a metallic noise, and then nothing. The panel was off. The motor was silent. Then the emergency lights came on, bathing the small space in a pale, harsh illumination. Lauren was the first to speak. "Oh, did it freeze?" she murmured, her tone more sympathetic than panicky. Andrew calmly pressed the emergency button, but there was no response. The panel remained off. I tried my cell phone. No signal. So, did she? There was a brief silence, interrupted only by their breathing. Andrew cleared his throat and spoke almost to himself. "We're trapped." Lauren, still leaning against the side of the elevator, took a deep breath and answered with a serenity that disconcerted him. "It seems fate wanted you to stop for a while, Mr. Miller." He turned his face toward her, surprised by her comment. "How do you know my name?" "Anyone who works with urban projects has heard your name more than once," he said with a half smile. That little exchange had the effect of a crack of light in a dark room. Andrew settled back, leaning against the other wall of the elevator, as if accepting that they would be there for a while. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel pressured to fake anything. He didn't have to appear unwavering or bored or superior. They were trapped. Just that. Money, position, company, or the leather briefcase with the contracts didn't matter. Time literally stopped there. Lauren took a small bottle of water out of her backpack and offered it to him without ceremony. He shook his head but thanked her. "Well, since we're going to spend a little time here, I'm Lauren," she said, extending her hand. Andrew squeezed it, a little surprised by the spontaneous gesture. "Andrew, I know. Miller, the famous one." This time he laughed, half awkwardly, half relieved. Her spontaneity disarmed him. Lauren sat on the elevator floor, resting the blueprints beside her, as if she'd been through worse. Andrew hesitated but ended up doing the same. The heat was starting to rise inside, and the air felt less fresh by the minute. Before they knew it, they started talking. First about the weather, then about each person's reason for being there that day. She said she worked with inclusionary urbanism and was trying to convince a group of engineers to pay attention to a revitalization project in a vulnerable area of the South Bronx. She spoke passionately, but without exaggeration, like someone who knows the value of what she's doing and just needs a chance to prove it. She listened intently, a rarity for someone who normally only listens to respond. "My father was a bricklayer," she said at one point, "and I grew up watching him build houses for rich people. I just thought, one day I want to build for people like me." Andrew didn't know what to say at that moment. The sincerity of that sentence cut through him like a slow cut, the kind of thing you don't expect to hear in an office building elevator. Andrew took a few seconds to respond. That phrase about building for people like her kept echoing in his head. It was the kind of thing he hadn't heard in a long time. Perhaps he'd never heard anyone speak so firmly and at the same time so simply. He took a deep breath, adjusting his tie, which was starting to bother him more than usual. "I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth either, if that's what you're thinking," he said, staring at the elevator floor. "I grew up in Queens. My father was a bus driver and my mother was a public school teacher. I programmed it on the old computer my cousin took apart for me. I put it together piece by piece using a YouTube video." Lauren smiled, as if recognizing a part of her own story in the other person. "And now there you are, CEO of AM Tech, on the cover of a magazine." "Yes, but no one asks what we lose along the way," he replied in a lower tone. Lauren nodded in agreement. "And do you miss him?" Andrew looked at her in surprise at the question. No one had ever asked that so casually. "Sometimes I forget who I was before all this. Before the money, before the image," he replied, more to himself than to her. Lauren leaned her head against the wall, staring at the elevator ceiling as if searching for an exit there. I don't think we'll ever forget it. It just piles other things on top of it. But it only takes one broken elevator for everything to collapse at once. They laughed. It was a short, almost shy but sincere laugh. It was as if, for a few minutes, the outside world had ceased to matter. There, in that metal cube, it was just the two of them, with their stories, their flaws, their truths. Lauren talked about her arrival in New York, the difficulties with her pension, her first low-paying internship, the first floor she walked onto, trembling with nerves. Andrew shared the frustration of realizing that they respected him more out of fear than admiration. Some people think the top is the highest place, but sometimes it's just the loneliest, he said, his voice trailing off. The heat was starting to bother them more, and they had both taken off their coats. Lauren offered water again, and this time Andrew accepted. He took 2 sips and returned the drink gratefully. It's funny how we never look forward to these breaks, isn't it? She commented. I don't even remember the last time I spent more than 5 minutes without looking at a cell phone, a watch, or a goalpost. Maybe the universe put the handbrake on you, Lauren said, laughing. He looked at her and for the first time saw lightness on someone's face in that building. It wasn't a foolish lightness. It was a quiet strength, like someone who had already carried too much weight and still chose to smile. You're different from the people I usually hang out with, he snapped, without thinking. Lauren raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. And is that good or bad? It's new, he replied, smiling slightly. Time inside the elevator began to lose meaning. They didn't know how much time had passed, but it didn't matter anymore. The conversation flowed with a naturalness neither of them expected. Lauren asked if Andrew had already visited Brownsville. He denied it without shame. I never have been. It should. There are many people there who understand urban logistics in practice more than many office engineers. And you? Do you always go? Whenever I can. I have friends there, and the project I'm here to present today is right there. If they let me, right? He smiled, but there was a hint of frustration between the lines. Could you show it to me sometime? Andrew suggested, without irony. Lauren looked at him, trying to understand whether it was a provocation or a real invitation, but his gaze left no room for doubt. For the first time that day, she felt her heart race, not from stress, but from a certain pleasant bewilderment. Another jolt in the elevator interrupted their conversation. They both lost their balance for a second and their bodies touched slightly. Lauren reflexively placed her hand on Andrew's arm. She quickly turned around and asked with a worried look, "Are you okay?" "I'm just heart racing," she replied, trying to laugh, but with her eyes still slightly open. He picked up the tube of plans that had fallen to the floor and handed it to her, an almost instinctive gesture of care. The atmosphere inside had changed. It was no longer just conversation or relaxation. There was a new kind of tension in the air, not uncomfortable but unexpected. Lauren looked away for a few seconds, as if trying to control a feeling she couldn't quite understand. Andrew ran his hand through his hair and leaned back against the wall, this time looking directly at her. "You know, I don't think it's been a while since I've actually talked to someone. There's no rush, no posturing." Lauren shrugged. "Sometimes that's all we need. But the world moves too fast." Minutes later, they heard voices coming from upstairs. It was the maintenance technicians. A brighter light appeared from above, and soon someone appeared through the trapdoor with a flashlight. "Is everything okay in there? We'll get you out in a few minutes." Andrew replied yes, thanking her. Lauren arranged her hair and slowly stood up. He did the same. The moment of suspension was about to end, and with it, something invisible seemed to slip through their fingers. What had been created there, in that bubble outside of time, risked disappearing as soon as the door opened. The two looked at each other as if they knew this. When the side door finally opened and a metal ladder was positioned, Lauren tightened her grip on the tube with the plans and took a deep breath. "Well, it was an unexpected start to the week," he said. "To say the least," Andrew replied, still looking at her as if he had more to say but didn't know how. Once in the hallway, surrounded by technicians, security guards, and onlookers, the two instinctively moved away, as if the outside world demanded they return to their roles. Lauren said goodbye with a shy gesture and continued toward the floor where their meeting would be held. Andrew stood there for a moment, watching her walk away. Then, with a quick gesture, he called a security guard and asked for his full name. The employee hesitated, but answered. Andrew discreetly wrote it down. He didn't know exactly why. He'd done that. He just knew he didn't want this encounter to end there. Later that day, he asked his assistant to locate Lauren Brooks and send her an informal invitation. No company logo, no protocol. A simple, straightforward, "If you'd like to talk further, I'd love to have coffee with you." No elevators this time. And her number. Lauren received the message late that afternoon, already at home, still tired from the day's tension. She read it, reread it, smiled to herself. She considered not responding. She thought it might be dangerous to mix things up, but deep down she knew something different had happened there. Something that couldn't be pretended, didn't exist. She responded the next day simply, "Coffee at Maple Cafe, Wednesday, 5 p.m. if you're still interested." Andrew responded with a single word, "I will be." And so, what seemed like a random setback became the first chapter of something that even they didn't know where it would lead. The Maple Cafe was located on a quiet street in Chelsea, surrounded by ancient trees and an atmosphere that blended the charm of old New York with the modern pace of quick encounters and carefully filtered coffees. Lauren arrived 15 minutes early. She had chosen her outfit carefully, but without going overboard. A discreet light blue blouse with the sleeves rolled up to the elbows and high-waisted jeans. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her small hoop earrings added a subtle touch of vanity. She sat at an outdoor table where the evening light fell softly and ordered a strong black coffee. While I waited, I played on my phone, but I didn't read anything closely. Her body was there, but her head was already reliving what had happened inside that elevator. It wasn't just the conversation, nor just the attentive gesture Andrew showed at the end. It was the way he listened to her, the way he didn't try to look bigger, or busier, or distant. It was rare to see that, especially someone with the last name Miller. Andrew arrived at 5 p.m. sharp, with no chauffeur, no security. It was different, still elegant, but lighter. He traded his suit for a white shirt tucked into his forearms and navy twill pants. When he saw her sitting on the sidewalk, he actually smiled. It was a smile he didn't even remember having. Lauren stood up and greeted him with a firm, unceremonious handshake. "You're just in time," he said. "Of course. You said 5 p.m. I wouldn't miss it," he replied, pushing back his chair. She raised an eyebrow and joked, "Were you always good at following orders? Only the ones that make sense?" He replied with a twinkle in his eyes. The waiter arrived, took their order, and the two sat down. The conversation flowed naturally from the first minute. They talked about the city, the subway stations that always seemed to be late, the cafe's architecture, the maple trees that gave the place its name, and stories they remembered from the Midwest and Queens. After a few minutes, Andrew got straight to the point. "I was thinking about what you said there in the elevator, about building for those who've never had access, about the South Bronx project." Lauren remained silent, listening. Amtech is developing a smart cities pilot plan, but the human component is missing. There's a lack of people who know the area, who think about the city from the inside out. She looked at him intrigued. "And you want me to be a part of it? I want you to help me transform this project into a model of real impact. Not just technology, dignity." Lauren rested her elbows on the table, interlacing her fingers. "Before I help you, I want you to see it for yourself. Like this? Brownsville, Sunday. I want you to go there with me. I want you to meet Paul, Mary, the kids. I want you to feel what I feel. After that, if you still want to continue, we can talk about a partnership." The next day, Andrew hesitated before answering. Brownsville wasn't one of the places he frequented. Not out of direct prejudice, but out of inertia. The truth is, he stayed away from the reality that was once his. Lauren's proposal wasn't just a visit, it was an immersion. An invitation to leave his comfort zone and confront something he had perhaps avoided for years. At the end of the afternoon, he responded with a simple, "Sunday. What time?" Lauren sent the location and finished with a dry phrase, "Don't be late. There's no waiting room there." And in that instant, something inside him stirred. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a desire to start over. And who knows, maybe to reconnect with a part of himself he thought he'd forgotten. Sunday dawned cloudy, with that white sky that seemed undecided whether to open or close. Andrew woke up before his alarm. He spent a long time sitting on the edge of his bed, looking out at the city through the bedroom window, as if trying to prepare for something he couldn't explain. He chose a simple outfit: jeans, sneakers, and a black t-shirt. He didn't want to attract attention. He didn't want to look out of place. Still, when he got in the car and saw the route to Brownsville on the GPS, he felt butterflies in his stomach. It wasn't fear. It was something more. A new discomfort, the kind of feeling he rarely allowed himself to feel. He arrived at the agreed-upon spot 10 minutes early. Lauren was already waiting for him, sitting on a bench next to a small market, drinking coconut water from a plastic cup. It was different, more at ease, more at home. She was wearing a light blouse, comfortable pants, and worn sneakers. When she saw him, she said hello casually. "You're early. I was afraid I'd miss the entrance," he replied, laughing. "There are no turnstiles here, Miller. Just respect." They walked through the narrow streets of the community, dodging motorcycles, running children, and low wires. Lauren seemed to know everyone. She greeted people by name, exchanged a few words, and asked quick questions. Andrew observed everything, in silence, trying to assimilate the reality before him. Houses piled up, makeshift construction, dangerous staircases, but also walls painted in vibrant colors, the smiles of ordinary people, and the smell of homemade food wafting from open windows. They arrived at a small community school, where a group of young people were discussing ideas for grassroots urban planning. Lauren introduced them. "This is Andrew, the one you thought wouldn't show up." Laughter. A boy named Paul extended his hand, smiling. "If he's the one funding the project, he should listen to us before sending engineers." Andrew shook his hand firmly. "I agree. That's why I'm here." Later, they went inside the home of Mary, a friend of Lauren's, who cared for 2 young children and dreamed of opening a soup kitchen. Andrew heard stories that weren't in the spreadsheets. He saw the cracks in the walls, the makeshift pipes, the exposed wires. But he also saw school posters hung with duct tape, a makeshift table, with clean pots and pans and handmade toys. He felt something tighten in his chest. It was as if all this reminded him of where he came from, and at the same time, showed him how far he had distanced himself from it. Lauren watched without saying much. Let it soak in. After lunch at a simple restaurant in Brooklyn, they walked through a local park. It was a small space, but full of life. Children with kites, old people sitting on benches, young people dancing. They sat on a bench in the shade of a tree. They were silent for a few minutes until Andrew said, "When we were in the elevator, there were only 2 of us." Lauren nodded, looking ahead. "Maybe we still are." In the late afternoon, a light breeze blew, and there was a feeling that something important had happened there. Andrew took his cell phone out of his pocket, but not to check his emails. "I took a picture of the park." Then he looked at Lauren. "I'm scared," he confessed without thinking. She turned to face him. "Me too. But what if we take it one step at a time?" He smiled. For the first time, without reservation. The 2 of them stayed there for a while longer, talking about important things: the city, the projects, the children, the desire to change things without having to destroy what already exists. When they finally stood up, Lauren said, "I didn't bring you here to convince you. I just wanted you to see it." "And I saw it," she replied. "I saw more than I expected." The ride back was silent, but not awkward. It was the kind of silence that comes after a long conversation, when there's no need to say anything more. In the following weeks, Andrew returned to Brownsville 3 more times, all with Lauren. This time not by invitation, but of his own free will. The Smart Cities project now has a core dedicated exclusively to the community, focusing on simple, accessible, and urgent solutions: sanitation, internet service, local transportation. Andrew, who had previously discussed numbers and technology with a certain detachment, began to listen more and talk less. He discovered that Mary, in addition to cooking, could organize spreadsheets better than many of the analysts on his team. He discovered that Paul dreamed of being an engineer, but didn't have a computer at home. He discreetly took one for himself. Lauren followed everything but didn't comment. He simply observed, with the kind of silent approval Andrew had come to seek. Outside of work, the 2 began seeing each other more frequently, first by email, then by text message, then by will. Sometimes a quick lunch, other times a walk without a destination. Their presence together became less formal, more natural. And with it, more dangerous too, at least from the point of view of their public image. Andrew wasn't the type of man who fell in love easily. She was used to tailor-made relationships, with calculated encounters and safe distances. But with Lauren, it was different. There was a good discomfort, a constant feeling of being challenged, of standing in front of one's own mirror. She didn't admire him for his position or his company. Perhaps that's why he listened to her more than anyone else. Lauren, for her part, also tried not to get carried away. I had a life built with great effort. I knew that getting too involved could ruin not only my heart, but also my concentration at work. However, every time Andrew appeared with a sincere question, with a gesture of genuine listening, or when he fell silent at just the right moment, she felt her defenses lower. And it was in those spaces that the relationship grew, like someone who plants something without realizing it. One day, he brought her coffee at her office. Another day, she brought him dulce de leche from the Northeast. Little things, but it was these things that began to stick in her memory. It was a Thursday afternoon, in a glass room on the 27th floor of AM Tech, that the idea for the press conference emerged. The project was well underway, and the marketing team thought it would be a golden opportunity to reposition the company's image. Andrew, who had until then kept the project out of the spotlight, hesitated, but in the end, he gave in. He invited Lauren to perform alongside him. She accepted, but with reservations. She didn't want to be treated as a symbol of inclusion. "I'm not a banner of diversity, Andrew. I'm an architect, a professional. You are both, and I want you to see this," she replied. Lauren took a deep breath and nodded. She trusted him, but she knew the outside world was different. She knew one slip would be enough and the whole job would come down to labels. The press conference was scheduled for Tuesday at 10 a.m. The room was packed, journalists attentive, cameras positioned. Lauren wore a light-colored dress shirt and black pants, discreet and elegant. Andrew wore a suit, but without a tie, a symbolic gesture. The two presented the project's progress, showing photos, figures, and testimonials. Everything was going well, until the off-topic questions arrived. "Is it true you two are dating?" a reporter asked, without hiding her provocative tone. Lauren froze for a second. So did Andrew. He took a deep breath and replied firmly, "We're here to talk about Brownsville. This isn't about gossip." But the question had already been asked. Social media began to buzz. Comments were divided. Some accused him of opportunism, others romanticized him. Lauren left in silence. In the car, she didn't say a word. It wasn't until the next day at home that she received a visit from Camille, her partner, who got straight to the point. "Are you afraid of being happy outside the path you planned?" Lauren didn't know how to respond. She felt that at the same time she was building something new with Andrew, she was being devoured by a narrative that wasn't her own. She needed to think, breathe, reassess. The following Saturday, Lauren took the subway early, without telling anyone. She was wearing jeans, sneakers, and a simple blouse. She wanted to go unnoticed. She wasn't going as an AM Tech architect, nor as a partner of the CEO. I went as Lauren, the woman who believed in real projects for real people. Brownsville continued with its routine, the blaring of radios, the smell of food being prepared, the voices of neighbors mingling with the sound of motorcycle engines. She walked through the alleys with familiarity, greeting familiar faces. She arrived at the community school and found Paul organizing a computer workshop with other young people. The new computers were being used. Children lined up to play and learn. She couldn't contain her smile. A little later, Mary appeared, holding her daughter and a radiant expression. "The project is already changing things, Lauren. Just having the internet working here was worth it." Lauren was moved. It wasn't the kind of achievement that appeared in a PowerPoint graphic, but it was the kind of thing that changed lives. After a few hours, she sat alone on a bench in the plaza where she'd gone with Andrew weeks earlier. She took her cell phone out of her pocket, stared at the screen for several minutes, and typed the message she'd been mentally rehearsing since the press conference. "We need to talk. In Brownsville." He didn't explain anything further. He didn't apologize or justify anything. He simply marked the spot, as if he knew that some conversations can only happen where it all really began. Andrew responded quickly. He simply wrote, "I'm leaving." He arrived about 40 minutes later, alone. He was wearing dark jeans and a gray t-shirt. His face was more serious than usual, but his eyes seemed calm. When he saw her, he said nothing. He sat next to her, respecting her time. Lauren looked at him and said firmly, "Maybe we're more than two people who met in an elevator. Maybe we're a symbol. That two worlds can build something together." Andrew nodded, moved. "If it's going to be a symbol, let it be of something real, something worth every second." The conversation that followed was calm but definitive. There were no accusations or exaggerated promises, just a genuine desire to keep building something together. Lauren spoke of her fear of being devoured by her image, of no longer being seen as an architect and becoming simply the CEO's girlfriend. Andrew listened attentively, without interrupting. "I don't want you to back out," he said. "Neither the project nor I, but I understand if you need to take it easy." She took a deep breath. "I just needed to make sure we were still in the same place, for the same purpose." "We are," she replied. "Maybe even more than before." They stayed there for a while longer, watching the children play on the field. It was one of those moments when nothing else needed to be said. The understanding was there, in their gaze, in the silence, in the mutual desire to continue. At the end of the afternoon, they walked together to the corner cafe where they had stopped before. The same smell of sweet bread, the same simple glasses, the same plastic tables. There, among soda bottles and hanging bags, they discussed the next phase of the project. Lauren suggested further steps with direct community involvement. Andrew promised to take the proposal to the AMTech board, but above all, they talked about how they plan to continue the relationship. "I don't know where this is going," she said, looking him in the eye. "Me, neither. But if it's with you, I want to find out," he replied. Lauren smiled. She was tired but relieved. "For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was experiencing something real, without masks, without interference. A true beginning." 6 months after that reunion on the park bench, Andrew walked alone into an inconspicuous Upper East Side jewelry store. He didn't want a flashy ring or anything that screamed luxury. He asked for something with a natural stone, simple but meaningful. The assistant suggested an emerald and he immediately accepted. There was something earthy and true about that color. In the following days, he quietly prepared everything. He didn't tell anyone at the company, he didn't involve a wedding planner, and he didn't even think about a party. He arranged to have lunch at the Maple Cafe, the same place where she had waited for him weeks ago, dressed in a light blue blouse and holding a strong coffee. It was a clear Saturday. Lauren arrived on time, as always. She was wearing a light skirt, a linen shirt, and her hair was loose. She was radiant, but natural, as always. Andrew stood, kissed her cheek, and pulled out her chair. The waiter brought their orders, and they chatted for half an hour, laughing, talking about Brownsville, the new project in East Harlem, until he fell silent for a few seconds. He reached into his pocket and, without making a sound, pulled out a small box and placed it on the table. Lauren's eyes widened. "Andrew," she took a deep breath, straightforward, without any rehearsed lines. "I didn't plan this, but I can't imagine a world without you. Not just on the project, not just on Sunday coffees. With you, everything seems to make more sense. Marry me?" It took her a few seconds to answer. She looked at him intently. What I felt wasn't a surprise. It was confirmation. "Yes, Andrew. Yes." And the yes came with a soft laugh, a twinkle in her eyes, and a shy tear she tried to hide, but he saw it. There was no applause, no witnesses, just the two of them, and a promise that began there. The emerald slid smoothly over her finger, and there, on that table where it all began again, they sealed the next step of what had once been just an unexpected incident in the elevator. The wedding took place 3 months later at the Brownsville Community Center. There was no fancy church or mirrored event hall. It was a simple ceremony, but one filled with meaning. On one side, AMTech executives in light-colored suits, holding plastic cups and trying to understand their footing. On the other, neighbors from the community, Lauren's friends, school children, Mary in her patterned dress, and Paul with a makeshift microphone, acting as master of ceremonies. Lauren wore a simple white dress made by local seamstresses. Andrew wore light linen pants and a white shirt folded at the elbow. The altar was a wooden platform with makeshift flowers in recycled vases. They exchanged heartfelt vows, gaze for gaze. "I promise to build bridges between you, between people, between worlds, he said. I promise never to complain about a broken elevator again. After all, it was the best accident of my life, he replied, eliciting laughter and tears at the same time. After the ceremony, a small improvised party was held in the schoolyard. There was a simple cake, hot drinks, music coming from a borrowed speaker, and lots of smiling people. It was a wedding more heartfelt than photographed, more lived in than planned. In the following months, life continued with greater vigor. Andrew created a social division within AM Tech, focused exclusively on inclusive urban planning initiatives. Lauren became a national reference in grassroots architecture projects. Together, they opened an NGO that connected technology with peripheral communities. And as if it were a natural part of the journey, their daughter arrived, Sophia. Small, curious, with eyes that combined both. A year after that elevator encounter, on a crisp autumn morning, Andrew parked his car in the same spot as always, in the basement of the mall where it all began. It was the elevator birthday, as he and Lauren called it. Sophia, still toddler, was sleeping peacefully in the baby seat in the back seat. Lauren got out first, arranging the sheet over her daughter's body, while Andrew grabbed the diaper bag and the folder with some papers from the most recent project. They both laughed at the sight of almost recreating the initial scene. He with the leather briefcase, she with a bundle in her arms. But now they were no longer strangers in a race against time. They were a family. They went up to the ground floor together and walked to the lobby of the building where the elevator had stopped. They paused in front of the silver doors for a few seconds. Lauren looked at Andrew and said quietly, "Do you think Sophia will believe us when we tell her this is where it all started?" He smiled and replied, "We'll see. She'll love this story." Later, sitting in a mall cafe, the two watched Sophia wake up and open her eyes for the first time that day. Andrew stroked the girl's hair and sighed. "You know what I realize now?" he said. "That I spent a lot of time in my life trying to build something to impress other people. And when I stopped trying to impress, I finally built something that matters." Lauren looked at him with a calm smile. "You didn't build it alone." "I know that," he replied, "and I never want to build alone again." There, amidst the cafes, the people hurrying past, and the soft cry of a child waking up, there was something that couldn't be bought, planned, or contracted. It was peace. The kind of peace that only comes when everything finally falls into place. On the way home, Andrew deliberately detoured. He passed through one of Brownsville's alleys, where a new construction project was just beginning. A blue-painted wooden panel reads, "Sophia Space, Center for Technology and, Coexistence." Lauren didn't know she'd named the project after her daughter. Seeing this, she remained silent for a few seconds, her eyes filling with tears. "You did this without telling me? I wanted it to be a surprise, a gift for everything you taught me." She hugged him in the middle of the street, holding their daughter between them, not caring who was watching, the honking, anything. All that mattered was the present, the now. The past had been necessary, but it no longer defined who they were. And so that man who lived surrounded by contracts, goals, and silence, and that woman who one day ran with a tube of projects in her hands so she wouldn't miss a meeting, now had something neither of them expected to find that day the elevator got stuck: each other. And more than that, a shared life project, made of bricks, yes, but also of empathy, respect, listening, and courage. Because sometimes all life needs to change is an unlikely encounter between the 14th and 15th floors. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future content. See you later.